Okay, Nicole. Before we got on, you basically could be on every month of my podcast this year, right?
Yes, 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 I could. I think so. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. And we're gonna talk about yoga, but I was reading through your kind of description of your podcast, Modern Anarchy, everyone. Awesome.
Thank you.
Conscious objectors to the status quo. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, let's talk about it. What do you want to know?
I mean, how did you arrive about this? How did you come to this?
Oof. I mean, I think a lot of that has been my own journey, stepping into my different identities as a queer, kinky, polyamorous person. Those are a
Yeah.
lot of different identities that are not as common. And specifically for me, my mom is Mormon. My family is very conservative. So I just felt like this really big gap between our understandings of the world. And I wanted to create a space where we could have open conversations about this sort of stuff to kind of close that gap, especially with how divided our country is. I think that conversations are really powerful to share that humanity and to hear other people's stories. That's kind of where it started. So I just wanted to be able to, yeah, have honest conversations about it so people could hear the humanity of other people who live these lives that we often have so much judgment for if you don't understand.
So what have you learned the most about talking to different people, objectors to the status quo?
That I don't know anything.
I know, right? We don't
Right,
really know
right.
that much, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Who knows
yes.
a lot, actually? Like,
Yes. I mean, I think one of the biggest things, I mean, I'm constantly learning on that podcast, constantly learning because I let each guest on the show pick who comes next, right? So it's very much so stepping back and kind of letting other people control that. So I've learned a lot of letting go and then also just the power of following your own truth. I think for a lot of people, there are so many things in society that tell you this is the way to live, this is what you need to do, this is what happiness looks like. And being able to hear so many people that kind of said, fuck that noise, and then go on their own path. And then that energy that comes with that and the life that they create through that it's so beautiful, in my opinion. And so I think that's kind of the biggest thing I've learned is to listen to your gut in terms of the path that you want to follow and where you want to go with your life.
so, I mean, how has your gut influenced your path in life?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up as a first generation college student, so I didn't really know,
Okay.
I didn't have a lot of like mirrors of what was possible in terms of this life. So I wanted to be a doctor at first. That was my like, oh, I'm gonna be a doctor. I'm gonna help people. I'm gonna save lives. But kind of once I got into that field and I was doing research and it felt so disconnected and cold in some ways, the way that our
Hmm.
medical system works, where we're all broken, you get 5 minutes with your doctor in, out. And at the same time, I was also volunteering as a sexual assault counselor in the ER, doing that sort of work with people where I would sit and do crisis counseling for ER visits after sexual assault. And it was so meaningful. That was definitely one of those big moments where I was hearing, like as a first generation student, become a doctor, a medical, that's the highest thing you could do in this society. But also feeling such a gut pull that I wanted to be able to be more intimate in my way of caring for people. That was the first time I was like, you know what? Screw this. I'm going to become a psychologist. This is what I'm going to do. And I want to become a yoga instructor. That's the other piece that I felt in my gut that I want to do, but
Yeah.
I'm too afraid of being that California girl that follows that typical. I'm originally from California, so I was like, damn it, I don't
Yeah.
want to be that person. But I was like, who cares? Like, I
Yeah.
like it. This is the path I want to do. Forget everyone else, and I'm just gonna start trucking along that. And so that was kind of like the first moment where I listened to that gut, and then feeling that same thing with starting the podcast, right? Like, I really want to start this space where I can have these conversations and do some consciousness raising about some of these topics, my feminist leaning to have conversations about this stuff. And so that was that. And man, it's taken me on an interesting journey. And even the people I've met, the people I'm dating now in terms of connections through the podcast, I'm just on a wild ride at
I
this
mean, you really
point.
are. I mean, look at you. I'm
Hell
here
yeah.
dating people from the podcast. You're doing stuff. So we got
It,
to get to that. We got to get to
yeah,
that
yeah, it's
part.
connected me to some really, really cool people.
Most
Yeah.
definitely. So yoga, you felt pulled toward yoga. What is it about yoga? I mean, I'm on the West Coast myself,
Yeah.
so like I remember being in Ocean Beach not that long ago in San Diego. And that's a wild place, by the way. It's
Mm-hmm.
surfing,
Mm.
yoga, like a swap meet, basically. It's like
Mhm,
people doing
mhm.
acro yoga. It was all over the place. What was the pull
Yes.
for yoga?
For me, I've always, my parents owned a gym, so I was always in this like really like active, you gotta stay healthy with your
Okay.
body sort of thing.
Okay.
And originally I went to yoga to stretch because I was so, and still am in many ways, deeply inflexible, you know? So I was like, I really should do that sort of thing. And then once I went, a couple of classes, I just noticed that I felt better, not just physically, but also mentally, when you take that moment to slow down and to connect to your breath and be a little bit stiller and yeah, just take that moment to be present. I think a lot of it is that for me is it slows me down to just be with my body, to be with my breath. And when I first came to the practice, I didn't have any sort of meditation like that. So I started noticing such a big difference in that experience. And, yoga has this, there's a set sequence for some of the poses, and you can notice yourself progress as you continue to practice over your time. And so I kind of got addicted almost in a beautiful way to the benefit of feeling more present and noticing myself progress and my flexibility and challenging myself in so many ways that yeah, it became a integral part of my spirituality and mental health at that point.
It's interesting the S word. It's a different S word, here.
Spirituality or
Yeah.
sex, which one? Or are
Yeah,
they the
well,
same thing?
there are a lot of S words out there, like
Yeah.
with spirituality. Run up against this when I talk to lots of professionals in the psychedelic space.
Hmm.
I'm like, I feel like it's very difficult to escape the spiritual aspect of that. And the same thing with yoga. How do you see that manifest playing out in that space?
In which one, the psychedelic or the
In
yoga?
yoga, yeah.
Okay.
Listen, we got a lot to get to.
I know,
Like,
I know. Right now, my clinical training, I do psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. So, like,
mhm.
I'm like right there, in that
You're right
space
there.
too. In terms of yoga, I mean, my understanding of spirituality, I came from a very fundamentalist Christian background. So, I've got a lot of spiritual trauma there with a sense of spirituality that has felt restrictive, stressful, harmful in a lot of ways. So it's been a journey for me to even use the S word because I'm so like, well, I don't want to get into anything like that again. But for me, my understanding of spirituality today is anything that brings my spirit joy, right? So that's a lot of different things. So
Right.
in terms of yoga, I have that, experience of connecting my body with my breath and slowing down. And I feel kind of like I mentioned earlier, this rising in my spirit, my energy, and it feels good. That's spirituality for me. Spirituality is also listening to some fun music and dancing in my apartment. Spirituality is connecting with people over a beautiful meal and feeling the joy of that. For me, spirituality is anything that kind of gives my spirit life. And I think it doesn't have to be more complicated than that, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, well, I look at it as there's a lot of branches on spirituality.
Hmm.
And what most people, in my experience, associate that with a formalized religious experience,
Right, right.
but that there are many pathways, that being one of them, a formal religious experience, and maybe more nature based, maybe more yoga based. There's lots of different versions of spirituality. Here's a big question: do you think humans are wired to be pulled towards spirituality?
Ooh, now we're talking psychology.
Come
I'm right
on,
here.
let's
Let's do
go.
it.
Let's go.
You know, I think that I lean very existential in how I understand psychology and other things like that. Wired spirituality, that's a great question. I think that we're meaning making creatures personally.
Mm,
I think that we all live a life and we're looking for a narrative and meaning and purpose in this void to like kind of wake up every day and to understand our existence. And so in some ways, yes, whatever that purpose is, whatever that meaning is, I would say yes, that's inevitable for any human, whether you use spirituality. Other people might say their meaning or purpose is their work that they do. Other people might say their meaning is their family. All those things can fall under spirituality too. Maybe we just need a more expansive understanding of what spirituality is. But I definitely lean existential, where I think that all of us are looking for some sort of meaning making and purpose.
yeah, I think, well, there's a great book about this, essentially, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning.
There it
And
is.
it's literally all humans crave meaning,
Yep.
and to figure out like what is this existence that we're in. There's a lot of
Yes.
suffering, there's a lot of joy, there's a lot of different things
Mm-hmm.
for it.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like when I talk to people who are like heavily into yoga, that yoga provides a form of understanding of that. Here's another
Mm,
question. I'm going
hit
to keep
me.
diving here.
Go.
What do you think of yoga, basically ancient forms of yoga versus how it is portrayed today in, say, kind of
Mm,
Western society?
mm. Yep, that's a tough question in
Yep.
terms of appropriation of a culture that we have kind of whitewashed in many ways and brought this over
Mm.
here. Yeah, I'm just another white girl that's doing this sort of practice. You know what I mean? Like this problematic in its own nature. Um, I think it's interesting, and this happens in a lot of different contexts. Another one to think about is Tantra, right? Tantra, as a
Mm.
sex psychologist in
Yes.
training, it's another space where it can be very whitewashed and pulled away from the actual spiritual practice that it was founded in. And I think what's tricky about these things is that it gets pulled away, but people still find healing in these modalities in
Yeah.
different ways. And so it's tricky where it might be an appropriation and a washed down version in many ways, but people are still finding healing in that. And I think that's something I'm noticing even as like a psychologist in different books that I read that offer different ways of finding healing that I, as a psychologist, I'm like, well, that science is a little bit of a logical leap here, there. And it makes me kind of scared to read it. I was reading How to Break the Habit of Being Yourself by Joe
Mm.
Dispenza. You read
Okay.
that?
Haven't heard
Mm.
of that. Oh.
Okay, it's very interesting. Some of the like logical leaps he makes are, as as a fellow person in this space, a
Like
little
what?
bit.
Like what's the leap? Like,
Oh, well, Jesus. He's talking about the quantum field and how our
okay.
thoughts can change the quantum field and manifesting, right? Abraham Hicks, all these sort of ideas
Oh
of how you
man.
manifest. I know, and I start to try to believe, I'm very like, give me science, give me hard material. And I understand that, like, if these things are true, we couldn't really study them in the way that our understanding of science currently can. So
Sure.
I try to leave some level of openness, but there is like huge logical leaps in these where it's like
Mm.
he's saying if this, then that. And the logic is I guess a logic of faith at that point. It's not hard
Sure.
science in that way. But I could see how someone could read this and find so much benefit in what he's saying in terms of like letting go of your old self to the new self and meditation in this way. So I
Sure.
think I see a lot of this where it's like things are pulled away from maybe hard science or their original creation as a spiritual practice and religion, but people can still find so much healing in these things. So
Of course.
I think it's a complicated question. I'm happy if people find healing, but it's important to honor the fact that these practices come from a long tradition that should be respected for the
Yes.
culture.
I like complicated questions.
Yeah,
You're gonna keep getting complicated
hit
questions
me.
from
I love
me.
them.
It's just what I like to do.
Yes.
All right, so here we go again. It's just another thing coming up
Yeah.
here. So manifesting.
Mm-hmm.
This is a strange one for me. I'll be honest with you. Like I've had a lot of people come on or talk to her like I manifest this in my life. The universe told me, okay, I'm trying to understand what this means.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm like, well, I talked to someone and I was like, so like you manifested, you got this great job, like, but what did you do actually to help get a good job too? Like
Mm-hmm.
you didn't
Mm-hmm.
just sit there and something happened to you, did it? It's
Right.
like how do you what's your take on all of that?
Whew. I mean, my take is that we live in an existential void, okay? At no point can I, with 100% certainty, say that I manifested anything. At no
Mm,
point, with 100% certainty, can I say that my gut is leading me to some sort of instinct path. There's a lot of people that say that. There's a lot of people, even at my current clinical site, that believe in the sense of an inner healing wisdom, right? Where just like our body knows how to heal from, a cut, maybe our psyche can do the same thing where it has this
mm,
inner healing wisdom, kind of like a plant that turns towards the sun. All these sorts of things I like to believe in. I think that's really beautiful. I think it introduces some interesting questions about where am I going towards? Is there a fate? Who defined that? What is that journey? No matter what you're doing, we have no proof to say with 100% certainty that that is what it is. And so it is always going to be an existential leap of faith to put trust in that. So at my heart, I'm like, yeah, that's really great. I've had some interesting synchronicities in my life that show up in weird patterns. I don't know. That's all I know is that I don't know. And that to put faith in that is an existential leap of trust. And you can't get out of that situation, unfortunately.
That's interesting because I don't think I've heard it put that way,
Mm,
but I'm tracking on that. I mean, I've always been a very faith-based person my entire life. I've had very positive experiences with like formal religion,
mhm.
and other versions of spirituality, but it's all faith on some level, right? If whether
Yes.
you decide it's not, it really is, because
Mhm.
I can't prove without a shadow of a doubt that, let's say, God exists, but I believe it,
Right.
right? And there's really no way to prove or disprove it
Right.
either.
Right.
And I can't say, well, the universe did bring you or didn't bring. I don't know, but
Mhm.
but it's a leap of faith. But I know that like nothing generally, like if I sit here and I do this podcast with you and I literally do nothing else, it's generally not going to do anything. I mean, it's not like
Right.
it's gonna people are gonna listen to it if I don't release it.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
there's just all these things I think to have to try to like reconcile with it. But I think the whole thing is that you're right. It is all an existential leap of faith.
Yeah, unfortunately so, right? It'd be much easier. I mean, and maybe that's the beauty of our universe is that it has so many questions, right? And that's the
Correct.
fun journey of all of it, but it is that leap, and I think personally it's nice to feel like there is something to believe in. It makes me feel a little
Yes.
bit more like I have gravity on this earth and to feel like my instinct is pulling me in some way and that there's some sort of balance to all of that, right? I mean, philosophers have been asking that question
Of
for
course.
centuries. Do we need God to exist in our life, some sort of direction? I think it gets tricky too when you think about the privilege of manifesting, right? Like you don't
Mm,
want to you don't want to sit to someone who is struggling to provide food for the table for their family and just say, well, just sit back and manifest. And maybe if maybe if karma was on your side, you would actually have. I'm just like, what the fuck? Like some people,
man.
there's real systemic problems in our country that have
Yeah.
created inequalities in wealth and access to resources. So I always get a little like, we can't just sit back and be like, manifest. That's
It's crazy to me. That's actually crazy to me. You're someone who's like struggling and you're like, just manifest what you want. That's essentially a prosperity gospel. So it's saying, hey, if you just believe hard enough and if you say it enough times, you're gonna receive it. No. I mean, there's plenty of people out there doing amazing things and then never getting what they actually want
yep,
or that. You have
and
to be
deserve.
careful about that, I think.
Absolutely. That's where I come in and say that too, right? Where that's, you have to be careful about what you say about those sorts of things. I do think, though, that if you start to see where you're going in your life and to get really clear on what you want to do and how you want to
Yeah. Of
live, that's ultimately mindfulness, right? You're kind of
course.
seeing where you would like to be. You have that moment where something comes up, a fight, some sort of thing. You pause enough to think, who is the person that I want to be, right? That's who I want to be. And you start to choose to act in that way. And I think in the same thing, when I'm like, oh, I'm manifesting that I'm going to be this amazing psychologist that writes
Yeah.
books and other sorts of things, the more I start to feel that in
Right.
myself, the more I carry that into my conversation with you, into my conversations with other people. And so I do think that there is this way where, like, when you start to quote unquote manifest, think
Yeah.
about things, you step into that space and act differently, and the world responds. But yeah, I personally don't believe it just shows up on a platter. But then again, talk to me in a couple years and maybe I'll be
I
like,
don't
you know
know,
what?
man.
I changed my view.
It's funny. Anytime you talk to anyone who's like in the psychedelic field or, has had wonderful experiences and stuff, everybody has a different vibration about how they talk about all this stuff. Like
Mhm.
you're like this, I'm like this. It's just funny. It's like you've gone through an experience and you can't have these kind of stereotypical thoughts about
Mm.
life. It's just almost impossible to feel like
Mhm.
that. And thinking, like you mentioned about, I realize I don't really know that much,
Mm.
but
Yeah.
so many people crave knowing as much as possible and like wanting to be right, the whole thing. And I figure that's like the thing with the universe with me. I'm okay with not knowing about space and what's out there and the planets. I'm like, I just think it's amazing it exists. Like,
Mhm. Mm-hmm. Well, it feels good to have some sense of control,
Yeah.
right? In all of this, right? To feel like I know the things and I have gravity and I'm grounded in this
Yeah.
rather than acknowledging that there's so many unknown variables. I think personally, I think this is a fascinating time for the human experience
Me
because
too.
we've never had so much access to knowledge in a lot of different ways, but specifically even in just about our universe
Yeah.
slash the scale of what we are in terms of a small, 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 small
I
speck.
mean, small.
What the hell? I mean, we don't know anything in terms, right, of really
Nothing.
our existence. Exactly. But you tell people that, and then we start to panic, and we're like, okay, well, what does this mean then?
Yeah.
Who am I? And I think it's really interesting in that way to think about how the internet has given us so much access to information like this in a way that humanity never had to contemplate.
Yeah. It's mind blowing. I enjoy space and stuff like that and learning like the James Webb Telescope and all that. I can tell you all about it. I know all that stuff, but I'm okay with like not knowing a lot
Mm,
about what's out there.
yeah.
Because, if a machine looks into literally the size of a finger of a point in space, and you tell me there's millions of galaxies in that one tiny little grain of sand, how could I possibly even try to know what else? It's like, I'm glad other people are looking for it, but you're never going to know.
Mhm.
And I think that's the thing that's kind of, we have to have acceptance, is that you're never going to have the answer to everything. That's really important to accept, I feel like.
Absolutely. Yes. And then to see the wonder of that, right? Like
Yes.
there's so much joy in, I mean, for me, it's always yes and both sides of the coin. We don't know the ends of the universe. How scary. And we don't know the ends of the universe. How interesting, right? Like
Yes.
we don't even
Yes.
understand how atoms work on the small scale, which is what I'm made out of. We don't understand on a quantum level where they go.
Right.
We can
Right.
go macro, micro, whatever way. And it's just fascinating.
I mean,
Like,
it really is.
what? Yes, and I think that's enough of even a spiritual practice for me to try and hold on to the knowledge that we do have now that has taught us that we don't know much, and to see the world through that. Personally, it brings me a lot of joy and it feels very poetical in some ways, but it's also very scientific to think about the facts that we don't even know, yeah, how these little atoms in my skin are moving right
Yeah.
now and where they go in the moments when we really try to measure them. How interesting.
I know. Okay. Why is there such friction between science and spirituality, in your opinion?
Ugh, what an interesting question. I mean, if you look at the history of it, I think that it was so deeply intertwined for so long, right? It was always that God explained all of our science, God explained all of these things. And I think that as we stepped out into the scientific revolution, right, we tried to,
That's,
sorry.
you see,
Yeah,
it's a
that's
sign.
that's a sign. My neighbor is doing something above me. Um, but yeah, as we stepped out into the scientific revolution, there was a really hard pull to get away from that, right? To step away from the dark ages of knowledge that
Hmm.
was, you know, God explaining everything. So we really stepped out of that and now are trying to not have that be the answer for things. And so, I mean, that's what I think it would be, is that like originally it was just so closely tied together that now we're trying to step so far out. And we wanted to have a very easy understanding of things. That's how we had Newtonian physics, right? Like,
Right.
here are the laws to our life. This is how it works. This is how objects fly in motion. And that's why it was so fascinating when, you know, Einstein, the quantum mechanics world, stepped in and kind of changed everything that we know to say that we don't know much. And so now we're stepping into this interesting space now, yeah, where we were God, no God. Now we're back to big question marks. So I don't know. It's an interesting
Yeah.
time.
I actually think that both of these things can coexist
Right.
amazingly well, and that they actually both lead back to each other.
Right.
I think they really do. And I think we're starting to understand that on, so I think people are craving spirituality more than ever, but they're dropping the rigidity of formalized things more than ever.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
people want science, more than ever. But then they're like, okay, well, what type of science is this? I mean, is this conspiratorial science? Is this like, is this even the peer reviewed process is somewhat muddy at this point. And it
Absolutely.
used to be the gold standard. And now it's like people are just cherry picking things to make it
Mm-hmm.
fit the narrative. So it's like we're in this trying to go through this weird muddy time
Right.
of this whole
Absolutely.
thing,
Yes, yes, because science in the past is used for harm, right? Science in
Right.
the past is used for really problematic things, depending on who was interpreting it and how they used it to further their agenda. So, I mean, always ask really big questions of scientists, right? Like, how are you defining your variables? What are your cutoff points? All this sort of stuff is always influenced by human bias, and we can't really
Yes.
get out of that world, right? Even quantum mechanics, right? Like the bias of being observer to something changes
Right.
how the thing interacts. So yeah, can we ever step out of that? Probably not. What I think is fascinating as someone who's studying psychology is that, I mean, I'm getting to this point where I feel like, not to be spiritual, but I think we're all kind of gods in some way, in terms of the fact that there is no truth, capital T, right? Like, you're having an experience of this podcast right now in your own head, your own life, your own experience. I'm having my own experience of this conversation right now. And like, where is the capital T truth in this? Is it your experience? Is it my experience? Is it somewhere in between? In my understanding of it, I think we're all kind of gods in that way, of creating our own narrative, of having our own story and having our own meaning making. To use God lightly, I know that can be sacrilegious to a lot of
Sure.
people, but your story, your experience, you're creating that, and that's only yours.
Well, it gets into a conversation. I mean, this can go a lot of directions, by the
Hit
way,
me, let's
into
go.
consciousness,
Yeah.
and it's man, that's a deep, deep field of study and research. This is also, I think, a field of study that is befuddling a lot of researchers
Mm,
because there is this section of people who want to solve the hard problem of
mhm,
consciousness, and that there's this kind of physical consciousness, and let's find this concrete consciousness. And then there's the spiritual aspect of consciousness, in the sense that we're spiritual beings and a finite existence type of
mhm,
thing.
mhm,
And I think we're again, it's another one of these things, we're butting up against each other. And
mm.
but there are different realities. Your reality is different than my reality, a dog's reality. I mean, think about the reality of like an orangutan or a fly. I mean, these are very different. The color
Yep,
spectrum that they
yep,
see things, how they
yep,
experience life,
yep.
smells, aromas, these are different forms of consciousness.
Mhm,
Children, child consciousness,
mhm,
it's all different for that. So we're struggling, and I think psychedelics is the perfect vehicle for discussing all of this,
mm.
because it is both scientific and heavily spiritual at the same time.
Say more. In what ways?
Well, I feel like it is, and having several deep trips in my life, it it confirmed my spiritual faith base hard.
Mm,
But I feel like it's for people I knew that weren't spiritual at all, it brought that to them,
mm,
which was incredible. I mean, these are people who are like zero, and it built that into them. And so I think, like, in that aspect, psychedelics, you're dealing with this hardcore research science, but you're also dealing with this huge divinity based element that I think a lot of researchers just don't want to allow in. But how can
sure.
you not with this type of thing?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think there's an easy way to do it, right? Because then
Yeah.
you're like, well, it's increasing my serotonin and that's what I'm experiencing. And so
I like
this
the way
is
you're
why
saying
this is,
that.
like, because there is an easy way to be like, it is still science, Terry, and this
Yeah.
is what I'm doing. So like, I
Yeah.
think just kind of like any aspect of life, there is a way to look at it where it's like, this is all it is, or this is all that it is in the other way in terms of
Yeah.
spiritual. And I think you get people that fall into different camps of that. What I think is fascinating is that we don't know anything, right? Like, we prescribe people SSRI, but we don't know how they work. We know that it does increase serotonin, but from the research, that's not actually the mode of
Right.
impact.
Right.
That's not what's causing it. So we don't actually know why SSRIs are effective in the way that they are. So a lot of this, like, you can study the brain, you can learn that this is the area, this is the receptor, this is the thing. But yeah, truly how it works, we don't know. And I think this is where I come back to like meaning making, right?
Right.
Because I love psychedelics. This is part of my area too, right? Like
Me
I can
too.
look at that trip as being like, yeah, I had extra serotonin, so I was in this altered state where things were fuzzy. Great. Or I could look at it as, I'm in this moment where I'm connected to the universe and
Yeah.
I feel the connection to other souls. I mean, and a lot of that, at least as my practice as someone that's training in this field and providing therapy in this field, is to honor whatever meaning making that someone creates out of it. There
Yeah.
are some people that come to me are very like, this is the science, this is how it's working on my brain, and it's creating neuroplasticity. That's why it's effective, right?
Yeah.
And there are other people that feel like it's the plant medicine that heals them and that brings that truth to them. And for me, knowing we live in an existential void, I'm not here to claim anything, okay? I'm not here to say one thing is more true than the other. I'm going to honor whatever people bring to that space as being their truth and their wisdom.
Yeah. I mean, you're playing this right down the line, I see. Like,
You have to,
no, I
right?
understand. No, this is not a bad thing. I'm just like,
Yeah.
everybody has different experiences for
Yeah.
that. It's just funny. My own personal observation of it is that it has a heavy dose of both
Mm-hmm.
on there, and like almost everybody I've run into about it, which I think is interesting. And now I'm diving into the more indigenous
Right.
aspect of it. And actually, today I just released an episode with this lady named Rebecca who was doing her
Mm-hmm.
PhD in the Amazon with
Cool.
healers,
Cool.
and it's amazing. Like the
Yeah.
work she's doing down there and honoring the ceremony and
Mm-hmm.
the amount of work, because there's two sides to this, or many sides to it. There's the
Right.
kind of clinical research side that's kind of in a room and it's very controlled, and then there's more like the shamanic side, which I'm
Mm-hmm.
really diving into, which feels very different. These two areas need to come together and honor each other, I feel like, because there's different pathways.
Absolutely. Yeah, there are different pathways, and yeah, respecting both, right, of what someone's meaning making is of that experience
Yeah.
and what tradition and culture that they're in terms of what these powerful things are. I mean, I think we do know that psychedelics significantly increase the amount of emotionality that you have, right?
Yes.
And that's a beautiful thing and can create a lot of different experiences. And I think that's kind of, like when you asked me, what have I learned? And, it's that I don't know anything. And
Yeah.
so I take a really big step back. These people manifesting might know something that I truly don't even know and I've never experienced. My supervisor, who speaks about the inner healing wisdom and the sense of the gut that directs him in that experience, he knows something that I don't know in his own experience. The indigenous practice, they know something that I don't know, and I am not here in any way to be saying this is the capital T truth of
Yeah.
any of this. And I hope that's kind of where we get to this space of it's yes and to a lot of our experience, where we can honor the different types of wisdom and live truth that people have in this world, as
You
long
feel
as it's
like,
not harming. That's
yeah, I mean,
right.
do you feel like this is just purely a question. Do you feel like we're as a society moving towards that? Is that kind of what your reality is telling you, or is it the reality that this is a very divided situation we're in? Because I don't know. I in my personal experience, I see a lot of good people and a lot
Yeah.
of togetherness. But if I
Hmm.
look outward beyond that, I see a lot of like everybody disagrees with everything. Like it's like,
Mm.
it's like, okay,
Yeah,
well, I'm not experiencing that actually, you
for
know.
sure. Yeah, that's tricky because I don't know the research on it. And I think it's something that I ask people a lot in my community too, like as a queer, kinky, polyamorous person,
Right.
I'm like in a very leftist group of people, who are all asking if capitalism is really the right way to be doing this game, knowing that there's people that don't have access to resources and are starving for food while certain people are at the
Right.
1%, right? But is everyone asking that question? I don't know. I don't think
Mm,
everyone is. And I think part of the scary thing is that with the internet and the way that the algorithms work in terms of giving you what you're already interested in, and the other space that we need to have conversations from different points of view and to be hearing that and to be growing through that together, I'm not really sure, to be honest. I'm
yeah.
not sure what it's looking like in terms of division. We know some of the conservative movements. We know that gay people are being killed at bars. Like some of these things, it might be anomalies and very much so on the actual
Right.
edges of the society, which is what I hope. My hope, my dream is that the internet is helping us to see diverse points of view and helping us to actually get closer to understand, to ask these questions about these systems if they're actually serving all of us.
Yeah.
Um, that's my hope. Is it true? I don't know. I haven't seen the research. I live in a bubble in my own echo field with my own friends. So, like, I don't really know. You know what I mean? And the news is going to give us the things that are scary, the things that activate our amygdala enough to want to read the article. So, I really don't know. I'd have to look at the research to see. And I think we're going to continue to see.
Yeah.
But I mean, if voting in America is any sign of indication, it's kind of interesting and not
It is
looking good.
interesting, isn't it? It's very interesting. I don't think I've ever thought about this. Do you think yoga is inherently a progressive leftist activity?
I think it probably depends, right? Again, on like what is yoga, right? Are you talking about the original yoga practice, truly the spirituality and all of that? Or are you talking about core power yoga, where you come in and they're like, here you go, we're gonna get a workout? So
Yeah.
I think that I know when I was a Christian back in the day that I was warned against practicing yoga from my
Why?
because it's leftist and because it teaches that God is in you, namaste, you know what I mean, which is the practice of
Sure.
honoring the
Of
light
course.
and the God in another person. And
Yeah.
so when I was a young Christian, I was specifically told to not practice yoga because it does that, and because the poses are honoring different gods, is what I was told.
That's wild, man.
I know,
Like,
yeah, yeah. So like there's definitely a space, I think, where some people would be like, yeah, yoga is totally leftist. It's honoring the Godhead in you. But I think also it depends on like how do you define yoga? Because I don't think that that's what core power is teaching when you go into one of those like more
no,
corporate
no.
level settings. So I think I'd have to ask what is the yoga? You know what I
I
mean?
mean, yeah, I guess that was a pretty general question. I was just curious of like,
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, I feel like I would like to ask that to a lot of people. Maybe be a little more specific with that. I'm just curious. I just feel like my experience, like I meet a lot of good people, and I'm not going out of
Hmm.
my way to like talk to people that are the same as me. Like it's just
Yeah.
that's not a thing for me.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding, hope, view of humanity is that we are all inherently good in that way. I think that we all like to work together. I think we all like
Yeah,
to be collective when we're not in a scarcity mindset of resources and power and other sorts of things. I think I like to believe that yes, we're all good at our core,
yeah,
and that's really where we thrive. Survival of the fittest was debunked to be more of a
yeah,
collective idea that we're understanding as a species. And so I think, yeah, I think the majority of humans want to do good. And I think it's scary though when that idea of what good is can be conflated with things like religion, right? Like the person who goes out and murders queer people is doing it because they feel like that's what God called them to do. And in
right.
their heart, they're doing the best that they think that they're supposed to be doing. And I think that's what's scary to me, is how that can be warped into other ways that cause harm for other people. But I
Yeah,
do believe that, yeah, at our core, we are all good beings that are trying to be connected, and that we're animals at some point too, right? Like
yeah,
when we don't feel safe, we're gonna attack. That's part of it. When we don't have the resources to feel safe, we're gonna attack. And that's part of the my view of questioning the systems, of how
yeah.
can we get to a better society when these systems are making us feel like we don't have the resources.
Right. I mean, you mentioned the internet and algorithms and the whole. I mean, I've talked about this with the different people, but it's great to have it with different people because you get different perspectives. But like,
Yeah.
how can the internet be better for current and future users of it?
It's a great question. I mean, specifically, what's coming to mind for me is something like TikTok, right? That has been known to reduce coverage and I don't even know the right words to say this for the algorithm, like not having people who are trans, overweight, or having people who are heavy bodied different disabilities, like all these sorts of things. It's fascinating that the algorithms are taking those away and that we have known research that these things are happening. That scares me. I think that in terms of the internet, we should have something that is more reflective of the actual diversity of the human experience. And I don't know who controls those things. That starts to get above my pay grade of, right?
Strange stuff,
Because
you know.
yeah, because they want to give you what you want to see. They want to give you what you want to click on and all those sorts of things. But it's scary to think how that can create its own echo chambers in a way, right? That's how we get things like the very conservative alt-right, where you have these videos, and call me out for the conservative alt-left, right? Like
Sure, of
shit.
course, of
Where like we
course.
start to get into our own spaces and then we just keep thinking there, thinking there, thinking there, rather than, truly coming together in a very democratic process to hear one another and hear the different perspectives and be changed by that. So if I had to say that, then maybe that's what we need, algorithms that bring different opinions, different views, show the diversity of the human experience. But again,
Yeah.
that's way beyond my pay grade to understand how to help humanity there.
It's a strange thing. I feel like the
Yeah.
internet's this amazing. I think we're gonna look back and think it's one of the greatest inventions of
Oh,
humanity,
yes.
but one of the weirdest things that people have done with it.
Mhm.
I think I've met so many people because of the internet, but
Yep.
actually in doing this podcast and all these episodes, almost every single person I've talked to says they're exhausted by social
Mm,
media, the internet. Like they feel like it's becoming less significant in their lives. And like in a lot of things, it's turning into this thing where like people are starting to be like, you know what, this is not good for me. Like these things, where are we headed with that? And all of a sudden
mm,
you're getting this collective, this isn't good for me. I've seen so much research that said this is bad for me.
mhm.
Where are we going with that?
Yeah, where are we going versus where should we go?
Okay, that we can do that. I mean,
You know what I mean? Um, yeah, it's interesting. I think that I can only really speak to my own experience with
of
this,
course.
right? For me personally, I grew up with the internet in middle school because I'm younger, right? So then I've had this sort of like connected to the hip sort of thing where my sense of self was being through posts to other people, getting likes, all these different things. And at least for me, yeah, I've personally felt much better without having Instagram on my phone, without posting things. Instead, I send the pictures that I would post to my loved ones through text.
What
And
a
I'm like,
thought.
hey, here you go. This is what I'm doing. Yeah, because I always think it's such a strange idea, right? Like, where in society would you choose to post this picture of something? So you're getting in front of a group of people standing on stage saying, hey, look, I did this thing. And then you look at the numbers and, okay, so 200 people saw this and no one responded. So you just got in front of a stage, said, look at my poster, and everyone just stared at you. That
Yeah.
doesn't feel good personally for
No,
me, and I think you can understand that in a lot of different ways. When you get a lot of cheer, then it does feel really good, but then do you get addicted to that cycle of
of
connection, of
course.
like externalization of joy from other people's response? Like it's all very scary. I think that I love that it keeps you connected. There's so many beautiful ways that you can stay connected to people, across time that you've met in different ways. Or and Instagram is almost like a business card these days where they're like, follow me on Instagram and see what I'm up to. So
Yeah.
personally, I don't know. I don't even know what to do with it myself. I am very confused by it. I love people like Adrian and Marie Brown who are just posting memes. Not just, they're posting memes. And I
Yeah.
love those memes because I feel connected to that. So maybe
Uh-huh.
that's where we get to where, like we follow uplifting content,
Right.
or other sorts of stuff like that. But it's scary knowing that our brains like fear. We like, the amygdala is attracted to
Mm-hmm.
things like that. And
Yep.
so, the news cycle is going to give you fear, 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 fear. If you start to look into that, you can get into algorithms where that's all you're getting. And, that's
Yeah.
at the end of the day playing off of the human emotions and for money to make your news system go, which is kind of scary when you think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had this weird epiphany about social media like I think 7, 8 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm 44.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a Gen Xer. Like
Yeah.
I'm in this weird Gen X generation where it's like we were known as the slackers. I'm not a slacker, by the way. I've never been a
Just to
slacker.
clarify.
But there's stereotypes about every generation.
Yeah.
And like I just remember like using payphones and like if I had a picture And like I would give it to somebody and it was meaningful to them.
Mm.
Or, it's like I remember when that thing like Foursquare came out or something, and it was like, give your location when you check in somewhere. And I remember thinking, like, when I was growing up, you never did that because you didn't
Yeah.
want people to know you were gone
Yeah.
or someone was at your house. And I was like, this seems dangerous to me. Like, so all these old ways, how I grew up without the internet, like it would always mess with my head about how things are. I'd be like, this doesn't make sense to me.
Mhm.
And then like
Mhm.
if I didn't like a certain platform, I would just be like, this is garbage. And I would just get rid of it. Like I never like in my podcast, I don't have Instagram or Twitter and any of that stuff. And I know maybe I'm missing out on stuff, but I just don't care. Like
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
you
because when
know,
it's your mental health on the line, like it's not
like
worth
what does it matter?
risking that.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. What
Right.
I think is fascinating as someone who's doing their research in sex and relationships is like how this changes all of our
Yeah. Oh, listen,
relationships,
man.
right?
This is another
Yeah.
whole podcast. I'm telling you.
Yeah, because you have so much access to so many people in ways that society never did. I mean, and you can think about it in terms of like codependency and having that open communication constantly and how that's changed our relationships in some ways. We're like, yeah, before you went out and you didn't know where your person was, and that was
Yeah.
kind of how it worked. And you came back together where now you can have constant communication if you want to, and or constant access to new partners, new people to date because of apps and things like that, where your world used to be so much smaller when you couldn't connect
Yeah.
on the internet. You only knew maybe what, like 300 people, and that was, mostly family and connections
Yeah.
through that. So all of this is really fascinating and very much so changing how we do sex and relationships as well.
All right, let's do it. Let's go there. Let's
Take
take it
me.
there. So you talk about, and I read about consensual non-monogamy. Okay, for
Yeah.
our listeners, I think it's good to. I'm like you, like I'm in science at my doctorate. We have to operationally define what this means. What is this? So clearly, so everyone will have a good understanding of.
Well, from my research, maybe we should start with monogamy. What is monogamy? I'm serious
Yeah.
because that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, okay? Some people, their monogamy means you can't hold hands with another person. Some people, it means you can't kiss someone on the cheek. Some people's monogamy means you can't have emotional relationships with someone of an opposite or different gender than you, right? So, I mean, I think first the question is kind of defining what is monogamy, because that's at least where my dissertation has gone. Because when you try to define non-monogamy, it's based on the non of monogamy. So what
Mm,
is monogamy first? And that has such an open definition that first off, I think a lot of people should work to define, right? Like,
yeah.
is it okay for me to go out to go get drinks and have an emotional relationship with someone of a different gender, the opposite gender that I would naturally be attracted to? Some people, that's breaking the rules of monogamy. Some people, breaking the rules of monogamy is watching porn. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, like, it really depends. So, like, non monogamy is anything that's not monogamy, and monogamy is the practice of what you can't do with other people. That was the only way I could find some sort of definition that was able to rein the big practice of what monogamy can be. Inherently, you come together in a dyad relationship and then choose what you can't do with other people and make that commitment to someone else. So, non monogamy can mean a lot of different things, right? It could mean getting that coffee with someone of a gender that you're attracted to that isn't your partner. To some people,
Yeah.
that's non monogamy and that's having an emotional affair. So it gets really complicated. First we want to define
Man.
that, and whatever that is, then it's the opposite of that, and doing it in a consensual way. And that can mean so many different things to people in terms of the boundaries of, emotional connections, sexual connections, somewhere in between, but doing it all under the umbrella of having discussions about it.
Man, you know what, Nicole, you just blew a lot of people's mind with that. I don't think a lot of people thought about it that way. I mean, there's
Yeah.
elements to that I didn't think about. I was like, I was like,
Well, this is the okay, as someone who wants to work with relationships, couples, more than that, like that's half of the whole problem. Okay, is we need to
yeah,
sit down and talk about monogamy is beautiful. It is a beautiful commitment that you can make to someone. Let's talk about what that looks like, because frequently what
yeah,
happens is there's not enough discussion of what that looks like, and we just go off of this automatic, well, monogamy, yeah. And then someone goes to get coffee with someone and someone gets hurt, all these sorts of things where we need to get more, we need to have more communication about defining what the boundaries are of monogamy for each of these couples. And it's always going to be different. And that alone, I think, would solve a large majority of problems in terms of the experiences that couples have. It's just there's not enough communication about it. We work on presumptions of what we're supposed to do when we're in relationship with people.
This is gold right here. I mean, this is people. This is gold. I'm going to give you a great example of what Nicole is talking about. This is literally going to crystallize this so much. All right. So I have an awesome friend. I will not name who this friend is, but he got divorced, and he said, oh, it's nice because now I can actually just have meetings like with other women and like sit down and have coffee with them. I was like, whoa. You weren't doing that before? He's like, no, like I said, I do that all the time. I've been married almost 20 years and it's been no issue. And in my mind, I was like, that seems weird to me. But when you said that, I was like, oh shit. I was like, it's exactly what, like that's normal for me. But in his deal, that was like a no. That was breaking the monogamy for that. And that's, I don't know, that just dawned on me.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? Right,
like,
exactly.
It's no big deal. I mean, we're just talking, having some coffee. But for someone else, that's like, no.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
No, you broke the rules,
Yes. Which I want to honor if that's someone's perspective of how they want to do their relationships. That's great. It also makes me want to ask questions of why.
But why? That's what I was thinking. Why? And I think you're right. You have to discuss these things and say, okay, well, what are you okay if I go and do this? If I don't go do this? I don't think people are actually discussing that.
No.
They're assuming
that
I'm not going to cheat on you. Like, and they think of that in a more of like a sexual context, generally speaking,
Yeah. And there's a lot of communication that could happen about that in terms of, I feel insecure when you go on a date or go get coffee with someone else because it makes me feel like you don't want to spend that time with me. And so how can we talk about that? There's so much that can be talked about in terms of these things because, I practice relationship anarchy, like the lack of ownership over someone. So, I have different partners in my life that have complete freedom to have sex, make love, create whatever they want with people. And like, at least in my own experience with that, a lot of that has been a lot of self-work to find my own grounding in that of feeling secure in myself when my partner goes to have sexual relations with someone else and to know that my worth is not at all changed through that. Personally, that's been my own psychedelic trip of relationship anarchy. It's been one wild trip in terms of self-development. It is wild, okay? But personally, now that I'm on this other side, like I couldn't ever go back. Like I personally, everyone can do what they want to do, but I will not have sex with one person for the rest of my life. Like that is not an option in my world.
Yeah.
I just think there's higher ways to show that you love someone personally. There's multiple ways to do that. And I think that for me, sexual fidelity is not one of those things.
Do you think, do you think that would, I totally, it's your thing. Do you think though, like, let's say 20 years or whatever, do you think that could change or just what you think it'll always stay the same, that mentality?
I always leave space for change at any point. So yes, absolutely. At 20 and 20, could I completely change? Absolutely. Now here's my thing. I personally, where I'm at right now, I like the idea of partnership because, when I think about the realities of there's a limited amount of time and energy, right? Love is infinite. You can build on that, but time and energy is limited. And so there is a limited amount of time that I can sit with another person, hear their story, be a part of their life, be a part of everything, and be with them. I really like that space of having that close dyad relationship. I personally don't think that that's going to change my desire to want to have sex with other people. I think that I can have that. And this is where labels like monogamish come in, open monogamy come in, where people have a primary relationship and then can have sexual freedom in other ways that allow you to still have that close partnership, because I think partnership's beautiful. So I personally don't think that my desire for other sexual interactions are going to be change in 20 years. I think I'm always going to want to have this freedom now that I know it's possible, now that I know the stats on women's desires and long-term relationships and the way that it falls off on a drastic drop compared to men, which is, it's very gendered, but like men in long-term monogamous relationship have a pretty consistent desire that goes slightly dwindles, but women drop off like a roller coaster. And so I ask questions as a researcher of why.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer. I have theories. I have theories of why. You know, I think that a lot of our understanding of sex is penis and vagina and a very scripted foreplay, penetration, orgasm, maybe for the woman, right? Like,
maybe.
and this is all exactly. This is all a very like heteronormative understanding of it. And so I think if we got out of that script, if we started having conversations about what people like, kink, other sorts of things that people could be bringing in, I think we'd have a lot more of that. And also, I wonder if there is a world where maybe women actually like more partners. There's been some discussion about the theory of like, oh, men wanted more partners, and that's been the history for so long because men wanted to spread their seed. There's also, that comes from a study of fruit flies that apparently was not replicated in humans or other animals. But there's also a theory of what if women actually wanted more partners because it gave them more chance of having offspring and having the best sperm impregnate them? Like, what if that's also the space of all of this too? You know, I think there's a lot of discussion, and my area of focus is going to be studying this for the rest of my life. Like, what is long-term desire? How do we maintain that? And maybe non-monogamy is part of the equation. At least for me, it is.
Yeah. I mean, I think like, I mean, it's awesome. You give great answers, Nicole. Seriously.
Thank
Like,
you.
they're very like nuanced answers. And I always appreciate that. The reason why I asked that question was like when I was in my 20s, the shit that I'm doing now would have never forecasted ever. Like, and I don't know what it's going to be like in my 60s. I have no clue. So I kind of kept it open like, well, I don't know if I'm going to be like this. Maybe like the 22-year-old me would have been like, hey, if I came back and said, hey, you know, we're going to be doing psychedelics like in your, you know, late 30s, 40s, I'd be like, my 20-year-old self be like, that's an impossibility.
Yeah.
It's an impossibility. So I have no clue.
Absolutely.
I feel like where I'm at now is where I'm at now. We'll see. It could be the same. It could not be. But
I say that,
you know, you never know.
Absolutely. I say the same thing too. Absolutely. I could be at 40 being like, you know what? I've studied enough of this that I want to go back to this closed idea. I could study enough of this and be like, I'm going back to Christianity. You know what I mean?
You
Like
never know,
I
honestly.
never know. I
You know,
don't know.
Maybe women do want more partners. I don't know. I mean, but you know, think about it this way. Some people want a lot of kids, and some people like me want one kid, and like, we're good here. I mean, it's like, like I had one child, and I was like, this is not for me beyond this one. I was like, and some people, they want to have a huge family. So maybe that could be a similar idea on some level, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't have to be, I think my thing too is that when you talk about non-monogamy, it doesn't have to be relationship anarchy. It doesn't have to be polyamory, having multiple partnerships. Some people really thrive off of swinging. Some people really thrive off of, you know, once a year we introduce someone else into our partnership and have a threesome, like to spice that up. Like, there's just so much space. And so personally, I don't think I will ever go back to one person. Maybe it is like, once every couple of months we bring in someone, or once every couple of months I go on a date. So like, I just think that there needs to be more space created for the opportunity to have sex with other people personally, because what we do know is how many people feel like sex gets boring, sex gets dull, all these other things. Like, why are we forcing ourselves to fit into this box when there's more flavors to play with? Like, I just don't know.
Yeah.
Well, it's meaning making, though. That's the thing. It's meaning making too.
It's meaning making. It's what you feel about it. You know, it's like, I've always felt an innate pull to be married. And I enjoy it. But then again, on the other hand, I'm literally like the only married person out of all of my friends. like no, and everyone else is divorced or like crazy single. Like it's, but then like, it's weird though. And then I see like really young people in their 20s, and they're struggling with their sexuality and relationships because of these crazy sexual dysfunction that millennials and Gen Zs are experiencing, and porn and the internet. And then dating apps, I'm like, oh my God, I'm glad I'm not in that. I'm like, I'm like, it seems like it's so much stimulation. And like, if you looking through a phone book, this is dating myself. There's all
Yeah, I
these
hear you.
pages, like you can't be into all the pages, it's like then you get paralyzed by all the pages, it's like
Mm,
it's crazy. I've talked to a lot of people who do dating apps, and they're all exhausted by that too. It's
yeah.
like the
Well,
choice. When you have so much choice, it could be paralyzing.
absolutely. Absolutely. Because is the grass always greener on the other side? And now we have to kind of deal with that specifically because divorce is now normalized in a way,
Right.
right? In the past, divorce was not an option. In the past, women did not have enough freedom
Yeah.
financially to even exist independently. So it was never an option to just leave people. So you were kind of, this is the
Right.
person I'm with. Now that we know that divorce is normalized, people can live independently, we're always going to be asking that question of, is the grass greener on the opposite side? And that's a
Yeah.
tricky thing that everyone's going to have to navigate. And, I think about someone like my sister who's Mormon, and she, was a virgin until she was married, and now she is married in a monogamous relationship. And I think, what sex means to her is very different than how I
Right.
understand sex, right? Like sex to her is a act of, God's blessing of that moment with him. And to have that for her is going to mean something fundamentally different. She's going to live a beautiful monogamous life that is going to
Right.
have different challenges in terms of creating that erotic spark. But because of the meaning making of what that is for her, that's what she's going to practice. I
Yeah.
personally don't have a connection to sex of a godhood like that way. So for to me, sex is intimacy, and I practice that with multiple people. I think that's the space where I want to get to, just that people know that there's different options. I don't think that we've been given informed consent, in my opinion. Talk about research. Informed consent gives you the options of all of it, risk, benefits. There are a ton of risks to non-monogamy.
Sure.
Okay. There are a ton of risks to monogamy. All of it has risks and benefits. I just want people to know that there's different ways to do it. And if you're unhappy with your current dynamic and want to explore more, there's a world where you can do that. And I think that's kind of like my activism, is just knowing that there's different ways to do this, and that there are people like myself who are really enjoying it and having a lot of fun.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the, I think, great disservices of religion influencing sex, because it
Yeah.
it's made it very vanilla,
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't honor the fact that people enjoy pleasure in many different ways. And
Mm-hmm.
that needs to be celebrated versus being though this is bad. It's like, no, you mean like it's freaky in a different situation, man. It's like it's okay, it's all good,
Absolutely.
man.
Absolutely.
We gotta celebrate that,
Yes, and I'm working on my first book, Healing Through Kink, and that's specifically what I'm exploring, is
right?
how to help people to know that there's more space to play.
Of
There's
course.
way more space to play in this than what is talked about in terms of what normal sex is.
Yeah. And there
Mm,
needs to be better. And one thing I've especially learned from all my podcast episodes, and I talk to a lot of people in the sex space, is the sex communication may be one of the more important aspects of it. You just have to at least talk about it. I mean, like,
it's insane.
no
It's
one's
insane.
talking to each other about it. That's what's
No.
mind blowing.
Well, because it's not modeled. You know
Right.
what I mean? It's not
That's
modeled.
exactly right.
That's the kind of conversation you don't have. That's the taboo conversation. That's inappropriate. We just don't have open communication even with our friends about the pleasure that we're
I know, that's
having.
so weird to me now. I don't know.
I know. My dream is that I can talk about sex just as much as I talk about the beauty of a bowl of ice cream. You know what? It's pleasurable. I have it in doses. I don't eat it every day. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, or I do eat
Yeah.
it every day, if you're having sex every day. But like, we should be having conversations about these things just as much as any other pleasure in our life that we get. But it's so taboo because of the puritanical culture that
Of
America
course.
was
It's totally
funded
where it's
on.
from. Yeah.
Absolutely, where it was like the body is sin, and part of that was really stepping out of pagan cultures, which had a more connected understanding of our bodies and sexuality, and the Christian church really turning on those people and saying you're a
Yeah.
witch, you're bad, and creating this whole other space where it's like the body is the sin. So a lot of that, I think we're all healing through kink. This is what I'm going to write about,
Healing
is
through kink.
healing. Yeah, absolutely, like healing through that collective experience that told
Yeah.
us that our body is bad. Like I wore a purity ring. I cried when I lost my virginity, feeling like I was worthless. I mean, like
Man.
there's, oh yeah, it was a whole. I mean, And when you ask how I got to this journey of studying sex and relationships, it was all of that. All
Yeah,
of
of
that
course, of
put me on a
course.
very strong path to be like, I'm going to
Yeah,
explore all of this.
of
And
course.
so, yeah, it's sad. And I think collectively as a society, we're getting better. There's conversations about it. You know, there's the pleasure principles on Netflix, how to build a sex room. Like there's
Yeah,
starting to be a little bit more conversation about it. So I think in the next 100, 200 years, it'll be much more of an open topic where it's easier to talk about and people are going to have more pleasure with it. It's just we're still healing, I think, from those experiences
yeah.
and the puritanical culture.
Man, this has bounced around to like everything I love. I'm telling you,
Hey, yeah, I study sex and relationships is the bigger umbrella one, right? We got that
of
relationship
course,
to self, the relationship to society, the relationship to others, the relationship to your spirituality. All of this is
of
all connected
course.
to your identity and who you think you are and how you move about the world. So, yeah, this is where I love to dabble and play in and intend to play in for a long, long future in this space of psychology.
Well, you're doing a great job. And I mean, it's great to talk to other podcast hosts because you just get it. You know how to have the conversation. You've sharpened the
Yeah.
sword.
Oh,
You've
thank
had the
you.
conversations. This has been very pleasurable for me.
Yes, it has been. It has
Really,
been.
yeah, this is fantastic, Nicole. Please tell all the lovely people how they can connect with you.
Yes, I have a Modern Anarchy podcast and I release episodes every Wednesday talking about all of this stuff and more. So you can find that on any of the podcast platforms, including YouTube. And then you can also follow the Modern Anarchy podcast on Instagram. And my personal Instagram is Topsy Turvy Anarchy. So come find me, check me out, talk to me about all these things and more.
Come find Nicole, literally.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm going on a fun journey, so stay with me, folks.
Love it. Love it. Thank you so much, Nicole. I
Yes,
appreciate it.
of course, of course.